I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I enjoyed a good horror movie now and then, but I always dismissed the stories of haunted places as exaggerations or tricks of the mind. That was until I took a job as a night security guard at the old Regal Grand Theatre, a place whispered about in hushed tones by the locals. It was a stunning structure, built in the 1920s, its golden balconies and velvet curtains a shadow of their former grandeur. But behind its beauty lay a sinister past. The stories went like this. Back in 1956, during the opening night of a sold-out play, the lead actor, Jonathan Hale, was found dead in his dressing room just minutes before his final scene. They said his body was discovered slumped over his vanity, his face frozen in an expression of utter terror. The cause of death? Unknown. Some claimed it was a heart attack, but the rumor mill had other explanations. Some said he saw something so horrifying that it stopped his heart. Fast forward to now. The theater had been closed for renovations, but my job was simple: patrol the empty halls, ensure no vandals or squatters snuck in, and report anything unusual. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a creaky floorboard or a flickering light. But I was so wrong. 11:45 p.m., the first signs. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I walked the aisles, checked the stage, and sat in the lobby, watching the security monitors. The air inside the theater always felt a little too cold, even when the heating was running. But I chalked it up to the building's age. Then, on the third night, things started happening. I was doing my usual round, walking past the ornate dressing rooms, when I heard it. A faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind. The words were indistinct, soft, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. I turned on my flashlight and checked every corner, expecting to find a radio left on, or maybe a stray animal. Nothing. Just as I was about to leave, my flashlight flickered. The whispering stopped. Then I heard a knock. 1, 2, 3. It came from inside Jonathan Hale's old dressing room. 12:30 a.m., the vanishing shadow. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew for a fact I was the only one in the building. My mind screamed for me to walk away, but my legs carried me forward. The door wasn't locked. With a shaky breath, I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old wood and faded perfume. The mirror in front of me was cracked, the vanity covered in a thin layer of dust. Then I saw it. A figure, its reflection in the mirror. A man, in an old-fashioned suit standing behind me. But when I turned around, nothing. I spun back to the mirror, and he was still there, staring at me. His eyes, wide, terrified, hollow. I stumbled back, slamming into the door. The lights flickered violently, and just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. I barely made it back to the security office, my hands trembling as I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. But when I checked the security footage, my blood turned to ice. The camera outside the dressing rooms had caught something. The door to Jonathan Hale's room opening on its own. And just before the feed got to static, I saw it again. A shadow standing in the doorway, watching me. Miss, I should have quit that night. After what I saw in Jonathan Hale's dressing room, any rational person would have walked away, handed in their resignation, and never set foot inside the Regal Grand Theatre again. But something about that place had a hold on me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was sheer stupidity, or maybe it was something else. Because on my fourth night, I made a terrible mistake. I went backstage. 11 p.m., the forbidden hallway. The backstage area of the Regal Grand was a labyrinth of narrow hallways, hidden storage rooms, and forgotten props. It smelled of dust and old fabric, the wooden floor creaking under every step. Earlier that evening, I overheard one of the renovation workers talking. He mentioned a sealed-off door hidden somewhere backstage. A door that wasn't on any of the blueprints. A door that led somewhere no one was supposed to go. I don't know why I wanted to find it. Maybe I thought if I uncovered the theater's secrets, I could explain the shadow in the mirror, the whispers, the knocking at midnight. I started my search, weaving through racks of ancient costumes and towering set pieces. My flashlight flickered as I moved deeper, the air growing colder. Then, at the end of the hallway, I found it. 11:45 p.m. The door that shouldn't exist. It was hidden behind a stack of rotting wooden chairs. The paint on the door was peeling, the doorknob rusted, but something about it made my skin crawl. The workers were right. This door wasn't on the floor plans. It shouldn't have been here. My heart pounded as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold beneath my fingers. For a moment, I hesitated. But then, click, the door swung open on its own. I shined my flashlight inside. There was a staircase. 12 a.m. The room below. I should have turned around. I should have locked that door and never spoken about it again. Instead, I stepped inside. The air was thick, suffocating, and I felt an unnatural pressure in my chest, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The stairs led downward, deeper than they should have, the steps uneven and crumbling beneath my weight. Then I reached the bottom. The room was small, barely large enough for a single person to stand comfortably. The walls were covered in old, faded theater posters, but the faces of the actors had been scratched out. In the center of the room stood a single dust-covered chair, and beside it, a mirror. It was cracked, just like the one in Jonathan Hale's dressing room, but unlike that mirror, this one was covered in handprints, bloody handprints. Then, behind me, a whisper, not just one, many. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking. The room was empty, but the whispers, they grew louder, desperate, pleading. I took a step back and something grabbed my wrist. 12:10 a.m. The hand in the dark. It was ice cold, a hand, thin, bony fingers, gripping me so tightly I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, a voice close to my ear. "Why did you open the door?" I wrenched my arm free and ran, sprinting up the stairs, through the hall, past the racks of forgotten costumes. The whispers chased me, growing into a deafening roar. The floor beneath me shook. As I reached the main stage, I heard it. A blood-curdling scream from below. Then, silence. The door slammed shut behind me. I didn't look back. I ran straight to the security office, my breath ragged, my entire body trembling. When I checked my wrist, it was bruised. A dark, hand-shaped bruise, as if something had been holding on. That night, I barricaded the security room door. I didn't sleep, because I knew, without a doubt, something was still down there, and now it knew I'd found it. I don't know why I came back. After what happened backstage, the hidden room, the whispers, the invisible hand gripping my wrist, I should have walked away. I should have quit. But something about this theater wouldn't let me go. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was something else. Because on the 5th night I saw him. Not in the dressing rooms. Not backstage. but in the audience. 10:30 p.m. A theater for no one. It was another cold, empty night at the Regal Grand Theater. The renovations were still ongoing, but no workers had been scheduled that evening. It was just me, the security cameras, and the distant creaking of old wood. I tried to focus on my usual routine, checking the exits, walking through the aisles, making sure nothing was out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, the temperature dropped. The air became dense, suffocating, like stepping into a vacuum. My breath fogged in front of me, a sharp contrast to the summer night outside. That's when I heard it. A chair creaking from the middle of the audience. I froze. The seats had all been empty when I walked in. But as I turned my flashlight toward the rows of faded red chairs, my stomach clenched. Because now, there was someone sitting there. 10:45 p.m. The man in the front row, he was in the fourth row, dead center. His posture was too rigid, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. And his clothes, they weren't right. A black suit, old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s. His hands rested on his lap, motionless, as if he were waiting for a performance to begin. I felt the urge to speak, to ask him who he was, why he was there. But my throat was dry. Instead, I did the only thing I could. I blinked, and when my eyes opened again, he was gone. Not like he'd gotten up and walked away. No sound, no movement. Just gone, but the chair where he had been sitting was still rocking. 11 p.m., the security footage. I ran to the security office, my hands shaking, as I pulled up the camera feed. The main theater camera covered the audience seating. I scrolled back to the last few minutes. At first, the footage showed exactly what I expected. Empty rows of seats. But then, at exactly 10:42 p.m., static flickered across the screen. And suddenly he was there, the man in the suit, sitting perfectly still facing the stage. Then, at 10:45 p.m., just like before, he disappeared. The chair rocked, as if something had just been sitting there. But what made my stomach turn wasn't just his sudden appearance or disappearance. It was his face. Because in the final frame, right before the static cut out, he turned, and he was looking directly into the camera, as if he knew I was watching. 11:30 p.m., a whisper from the stage. I couldn't stay in the security office. Not after seeing that. I needed to check the stage. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I confronted whatever this was, it would stop. Maybe I just needed to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. But as I stepped onto the stage, the weight of the theater pressed down on me. The silence was too heavy. The air was too still. And then, from somewhere deep in the audience, I heard it. A slow, deliberate clap. 1, 2, 3. The sound echoed through the empty theater, mocking, deliberate. Then a whisper drifted from the darkness. The show must go on. Every light in the theater shut off at once. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the security office, how I managed to lock the door behind me. But I do remember the last thing I saw before the screen went black, the man in the suit, standing in the front row, watching me. I should have left. After seeing him in the audience, after hearing that slow, mocking applause, I should have never set foot in the Regal Grand Theater again. But something wasn't finished. The theater wouldn't let me go. And deep down I knew I had to find out why. 1 a.m., the name of the dead. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Instead, I spent hours digging through old records, desperate to find out who that man was. The theater had been around since 1915, built during the golden age of stage performances. Over the decades, it had hosted everything: plays, concerts, even silent films. But every document I found hinted at something darker. Unexplained accidents, disappearances, a fire in 1957 that claimed 4 lives. But one name stood out: Victor Hargrave, a famous stage actor, a man who was once the star of the Regal Grand, and a man who had died on that very stage. 3 a.m. The forgotten script. I found an old playbill tucked inside a dusty folder, detailing one of Victor Hargrave's last performances. It was for a play that never premiered, a tragedy called The Final Curtain. But as I flipped through the script, my hands started to shake, because the lines, the final monologue, were word for word what I had heard whispered in the dark. The show must go on. My stomach turned. Victor Hargrave had written this play himself. He was supposed to debut it in 1957, the same night the theater caught fire. And that night, he was found dead on stage, burned, but not from the fire. No one ever explained how his body ended up there, untouched by the flames, his face frozen in an eerie, knowing smile. It was almost as if he had never left. 3:30 a.m. The stage calls me back. I don't know what possessed me to go back to the stage. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to see for myself if Victor was really still here. So I stepped onto the center of the stage, standing in the exact spot where he had died nearly 70 years ago. The air was heavy. The theater felt alive. And then, the spotlight turned on by itself, blinding white hot, illuminating only me. A shadow flickered in the audience seats. I knew he was there, watching, waiting, and that's when I heard it. A voice, deep, commanding, not of this world. Say the words. My breath caught in my throat. The old script was still in my hand, Victor's last monologue staring back at me. I don't know why, but my lips parted, and I began to speak. 3:33 a.m., the final performance. Ladies and gentlemen, the show must go on. The moment I said it, the temperature plummeted. The theater seats creaked, as if an invisible audience had just taken their places. And then, he stepped out of the shadows. Victor Hargrave, or what was left of him. His hollow eyes bored into me. His smile stretched too wide, unnatural, grotesque. His old-fashioned suit was pristine, untouched by time, as if he had just stepped out from a performance decades ago. And he clapped, slow, deliberate. The same mocking applause I had heard before. But this time I couldn't run, because I wasn't in control anymore. My body moved on its own, arms lifting, voice rising. I was performing, reciting the final monologue from his lost play, and as I spoke, I saw them, the audience. Row after row of shadowy figures, their faces twisted and wrong, all watching me with silent hunger. They had been here all along, waiting, just like him. 3:40 a.m., the final bow. As the last words left my lips, I collapsed to my knees. My throat was raw, my vision blurred, and then they vanished. The audience, the whispering figures, Victor Hargrave. The stage was empty once more. The theater was silent, but something had changed. I could feel it in my bones. The Regal Grand Theater was no longer haunted. The curse was broken. But at what cost? Because as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. On the stage floor, where I had been standing, where Victor had once died, a single black and white photograph lay waiting, of me, standing on the stage.